Good evening. The RRG welcomes you to the first Wealth and Economy panel. Today we have a group of very distinguished guests to discuss the ever more critical issue of Black wealth and economic conditions in Durham. Our guests today include Camryn Smith, Cory Hogans, and Henry McKoy. So, before we get started, I'm gonna pass it over to Reverend Care. Reverend Care.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much. Fatherhood looks good on you. I just want to say congratulations, blessings. Welcome, everybody. I'm so happy that we can all be here this gorgeous Monday afternoon. Who knew the sun was going to come out, right? But we are blessed to be here together and to be here in this work. And I just want to say thank you so much to our guest panelists, Ms. Smith, Dr. McKoy, and Mr. Hogans. I'm excited to have this opportunity to learn together and to think together. I'm really grateful to all of you for being with us. I'm also grateful and want to thank Eno Rivers' Restitution for Racism group. You guys have produced some amazing programming. You created a wonderful, very thorough class last fall, and now this series is very promising. You've done other work as well. I really admire how you've really reached out to the community and made relationships. And I think you're really helping us all find our way into meaningful relationships in this city that we love so much and that we care about so much. So thank you guys for everything that you've done to get us to this good place. Also, the design of this meeting is amazing. You had the vision that it was dinner time, and so you sent out and you invited us to order dinner if that was something we wanted to do from a Black-owned restaurant. Genius. And so we know that some of us are going to be doing just that. So I just want to take a moment now to just invite everybody to take a breath. It's the end of a long day for some. It's the middle of the day for others. But let's just take a breath together. And let's just center ourselves and say a word of thanks to ground ourselves in this moment. So, Spirit of love and justice, we give thanks. We give thanks for the planners and thinkers and dreamers and doers. We give thanks for chefs and farmers and those who prepare food and those who deliver food. And we give thanks for all the goodness that supports our lives, for everything that informs us and helps us catch a vision of true beloved community where all belong and all have a chance at a starting line that is fair, in a race that is fair. And so together we just say thank you and amen. Blessed be. And I'm going to send this over to Mary Davis.
Yes, there we are. Thank you, Deb, for helping us settle in and prepare for our forum tonight and to enjoy a good dinner, hopefully. And welcome everyone to our first dinner forum for narrowing the racial wealth gap in Durham. My name's Mary Davis. I co-lead the ERUUF Restitution for Racism group with Chris Macon. I'd like to take a couple of minutes to tell you about our group as we're relatively new and about our objectives for tonight. And forgive me if I read my comments, I tend to wander, so this is my way of staying on time and on task. The Restitution for Racism group, or RRG, was started at ERUUF by folks who had taken racial equity training and want to do something to make amends for the white privilege we enjoy. The white privilege is something every American seems to know about except for white Americans. We white Americans are so steeped in our own culture and power that we don't see the benefits we enjoy every day from simply being seen as white. Our system of government, education, police protection, healthcare, and nearly everything else in our country is rigged for white Americans to succeed. This is institutional racism. One result of institutional racism is that the racial wealth gap is very large. So what is the racial wealth gap? We're not talking about luxury here. Rather, it's all that a family owns. It's their house, their car, their investments, minus their debts. In 2016, the net wealth of the median Black household was about $13,000. The median white household net wealth at that time was about $140,000, more than 10 times higher. That, in a nutshell, is the racial wealth gap, and it's not right. Reparations certainly do for the barriers to wealth for Black Americans that we have erected and allowed to persist. This is scary for many whites because it's not clear what reparation will actually mean. Will someone come and ask for money to pay for reparation? We work hard for our money. Are we going to be asked to give it away? Money is likely to be involved. But what I hear many Black Americans say is what they really want is a system that's fair to them, that gives them the same rewards for their labor and safety in their communities as white Americans enjoy. Reparation for race does not have to be scary. The root of the word reparation is to repair. For me, it's a relief to better understand white privilege, the system of racism, and be able to do something to make it right, to repair the racial divide. In the Restitution for Racism group, we refer to restitution in the sense that Sandy Doherty, an economist at Duke University, lays out as the second step in the process of reparation for racism. First, we acknowledge that we as whites have benefited at the expense of Blacks. The second step is to do something about it. The RRG began with educating ourselves about how the racial wealth gap was created and why it persists. We invite you to view our 4-part video series on narrowing the racial wealth gap that was held last October. It's online. We looked at the myths, how the myths of the racial wealth gap, how the wealth gap was created and persists, the case for reparations, and what we can do locally to break down barriers to wealth for our Black neighbors. After the October discussion, people came to us asking for more about what they could do. For example, they wanted to start a project to make amends with the Black community in Durham. We're very much aware of the fact that we as whites need to be accountable for what we do. We do not want to rush in and solve the problem. This is something whites are very good at trying to do, but we want to be a part of the solution. We don't want to create more harm. So that's when we came across the Racial Equity Task Force report that we're using for recommendations of how we can become involved in dismantling racism. This report was published last July. I sent you a copy. I hope you got a chance to look at it. And we also identified the need for these forums with experts to discuss these aspects of the community. Dr. Cory Hogans serves on that task force, and he'll tell us more about the report in a few minutes. We're starting with the wealth and economy recommendations, and we'll have a discussion over the next year about each of the other sections that include criminal justice, health, education, housing, and so forth. So our objective for tonight is twofold. First, we want to hear about the racial wealth gap here in Durham and what's already being done to dismantle institutional racism. We've asked Dr. Henry McKoy and Camryn Smith to talk more about this to us. We also want to take action with coming up with some recommendations from our panelists about what we as Durham citizens can do about the racial wealth gap. Our panelists were asked to help us answer the question, what can we do to change things? The outcome of this forum, as well as the ones in the future, will be a preliminary list of actions we can take here in Durham to narrow the wealth gap. We want to move past talking We all have education that we need to continue, but it's time to act. So let's begin. Chris is going to introduce our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Mary. Really appreciate it. So let's get into this. We're going to start off talking today with Dr. Henry McKoy, who is a professional in business, community, and economic development, policy, government, finance, philanthropy, and the academic world. He is a faculty member and director of entrepreneurship at NC Central in the School of Business. He is also on the faculty of the Keenan Flagler School of Business at UNC Chapel Hill, where he's a professor of practice and strategy and entrepreneurship. In addition, he teaches in Duke University's Sanford School of Public Policy and is part of the faculty of Duke's Executive Leadership Institute, where he teaches on public-private partnerships. Dr. Henry has been a fellow of the Keenan Institute of Private Enterprise at USC Chapel Hill, as well as an Aspen Institute scholar. Really want to thank you today. Thank you for being here, Dr. Henry McKoy.
Thank you all. I'm happy to be here. Always I'm happy to engage with ERUUF and great folks. So appreciate the opportunity to have this important conversation. I don't think I can start out without giving a little shout out to my big sister, Lisa Jones, who's a member of ERUUF and has given me and my family the pleasure of visiting many times. So my task here, hopefully is to just kind of maybe lay the groundwork. Cory and Camryn are incredible folks working in this work, and I get the privilege of working with folks like Dr. Darity and folks doing great things in this work. And so part of what I was asked to do was to talk for a minute around this idea of wealth and opportunities around Durham particularly. And also talk a little bit about, what we know to be the history of Durham, because I think you have to understand, where we've been, as they say, in order to understand kind of where we are and where we're going. And I want to frame that for a moment because I think it is important. I did an interview this morning with WTBD because President Joe Biden has made a decision to try to use the payroll protection program to reach smaller businesses this time around. We're about a year into the coronavirus, and as a lot of folks know that early in the process, whenever the federal government put money into the overall ecosystem, it largely went to very, very large businesses, businesses that had enormous amounts of money and access to capital, and left a lot of small businesses out. And again, even when you think about small businesses, it left particularly Black businesses out, Latino businesses out, other businesses are incredibly small. I use that as a way to kind of put some context around, the challenge that we're facing now, and as it relates to, closing wealth gaps and things of that nature, and thinking about the fact that this is not easy. Folks want sometimes easy answers. I mean, they want to come up with this one thing. Oh, all we got to do is just decide that this is going to change. But as was said, I mean, this is systematic racism. And so if you think about the idea of an economy being closed, as we've had experience over the last year as part of the coronavirus, because the virus is spreading, closing down restaurants, closing down businesses, things of that nature, which certainly we know had a dramatic impact on the overall economy and had an impact on the business owners and their ability to make a living and things of that nature, and workers who work there. Well, put that context, put race across that context, because that's essentially the experience that black entrepreneurs have had forever. Is that the economy has been essentially shut down for them in one way or another. The resources have not come to Black businesses in ways that it's come to others. And so in some ways, this spread of the coronavirus really in a lot of ways is analogous to the spread of racism and what that has done to the overall economy. And so, as we fought and are fighting to try to get the economy back going, I want you to use that as a frame of reference as I talk about these things. Now in Durham, one of the incredible things about Durham is that, and I say this to you all here, I say this to wherever I go. I go a lot of places and people talk about this idea of, creating a more equitable world, creating a more equitable community. And Durham really is the place that, when I look at it, probably has the most ability to do that because of the people here. And again, I say that I'm sitting here understanding that we are still far from where we need to be from a standpoint of equity and inclusion. So let me talk a little bit about, only have a few minutes and we have more time. I have more time to share over time, but I want to give you a quick context about, kind of how we got to this point. Durham, as many as you know, we just celebrated around 151 year anniversary. It grew out of the end of slavery and part of what we know to be the Hayti community, which is the historic Black community that has been used really as it was used for a very long time as a model for Black progress. It really grew out of a unique circumstance here in Durham. American tobacco, which, we all know created a Duke fortune, really laid the anchor for Durham as an overall economy. Early in the process of the growth of North Carolina, Chapel Hill served as this kind of educational anchor because you had University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill there as the first public school in the United States. You had Raleigh, which was our state capital, and Durham was actually carved out of both Raleigh or Wake County and Orange County. And it really suffered early on to have an identity. Well, that was until the tobacco industry came about. And the tobacco industry really grew from the fact that at the end of the Civil War, a couple of months before the actual full surrender of the Confederate Army, soldiers spent a lot of time here in Durham during that surrender, about a week. And while they were here, they discovered the yellow golden leaf that we know it to be. And when they went back out to their home states, they really wanted that golden leaf. And so they wrote back to get that, to get access to that tobacco. And I say that as a framework because when we talk about the economy, you have to understand what drives the economy. And one of the important things that I think to really note is that, slavery lasted for 246 years, so almost 250 years. Slavery, chattel slavery for African Americans, or for Africans across the diaspora, lasted longer than we have been out of slavery. And so you have to keep in mind what happened from a systematic standpoint during that time. And so, having said that, Durham was, uniquely situated here in the South in the sense that what happened was that it was really built around this idea of connecting Black folks to the economy in a way that had not been done before. However, I want to say this: that did not come easily. Early in the process of Durham growing, Black folks actually were being left out. They were being ostracized. Our own state newspaper, News and Observer, really ran front page ads talking about how it was a disgrace for any white man to employ Black people beside white people. But it was only partly the fact that you had such a huge tobacco industry here in Durham that was growing and expanding, but you didn't have enough white people to actually satisfy the workforce. And that it was at that moment that there had to be some negotiation, some leverage with the Black community, because the Black community by that time was pretty fed up with the idea of, not being able to be in the economy. This is something important to know when you think about Durham. We talk about Hayti as, this historic Black community, and it is. And, and to make that connection, think about Hayti was named after Haiti. And Haiti used to spell its name Hayti. And Haiti was the first and only nation in the world that was actually created by a slave revolt. The Black slaves in Haiti overthrew Napoleon's army and created a nation. And so this small little enclave in Durham, North Carolina, decided to name itself after that nation that had been created by former slaves. And so it gives you some sense of what the vision was for this community. But the Hayti community in and of itself, I think it serves a unique aspect to think about the wealth that it created. But Hayti itself actually ended up being land that the white community did not want because it wasn't good for farming. And so they ultimately sold this land to the Black folks that originally were renting it because it was not good for fertile crops. However, the Black community found a way to turn that into wealth in and of itself. And so, again, by connecting to this broader economic marketplace that was tobacco that became a global industry, it simultaneously was able to pull up both Durham as a whole, but also Durham's Black community specifically, because in those segregated times, Blacks worked on one side of the railroad track, and they came back and they were industrial enough to create businesses on this side of the track to actually capture those resources. And so there's a whole lot of lessons that can be taken from what we saw to be the upbuilding of Hayti. And we can't think about where do we go in the future without understanding what it meant to actually do that upbuilding. One of those things was the fact that we created, very, very strong, in Durham, they created very, very strong Black anchor institutions. And those anchor institutions, unlike other places, were around, financial institutions. So for example, we all know the story of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and what happened in Tulsa with the whole destruction of Black Wall Street and things of that nature. However, there really has not been a community like Durham where the actual Black Wall Street foundation was built on top of actual financial industries and institutions. But Durham had North Carolina Mutual Insurance, it had Mechanics and Farmers Bank, it had a number of financial institutions that really laid the foundation for Black Wall Street. And part of the reason I bring that up is because we really can't talk about these racial wealth gaps and this systematic racism without talking about capital. Sometimes this idea of, capital gets lost in the conversation as if, oh, well, capital really doesn't matter that much. Just, you need the service or things of that nature. But capital is at the center of what needs to happen. Interesting enough, in the academic world, it wasn't until really probably, within the recent 10 to 15 years that academics have even admitted that slavery had a huge impact on economic development in the United States. Now, that sounds pretty ridiculous to most people when you hear it, that somehow people have denied for hundreds of years that somehow slavery had an impact on the economy in America. But the reality is that really is, the fight that we've been up against over all this time, is even to get the acknowledgement that slavery had a huge impact on the wealth of the white community here, which I think ties into this debate about reparations and repairing past harm. If people won't admit that it was actually this form of labor that actually created the wealth that a lot of folks benefit from, then it's very hard to even move from that if you can't admit that harm had been done. And so for a very long time, even the academics were saying, well, look, slavery was just kind of something that happened. It may have been bad, but it didn't really create this wealth gap that we have. But we know that not to be true. Well, one of the things that we can be proud about in Durham is that Durham was really and has been the longest lasting of the Black Wall Streets. And so there were, we use that term Black Wall Street often, but really Black Wall Street was a terminology that was really used in a number of places. Richmond, Virginia had a Black Wall Street. Durham had a Black Wall Street. Birmingham, Alabama had a Black Wall Street. Tulsa, Oklahoma had a Black Wall Street. And again, each of those Black Wall Streets were unique in their own way. So in Tulsa, that came from the oil that was in Oklahoma, during the Homestead time. And so folks had different ways of creating wealth around that. And so that becomes important because on this question of racial wealth destruction. So I always like to point out this point that, we talk about, this sense of kind of where do we need to go from here, reparations, things of that nature. The systematic racism by definitions, I like to categorize it as racial inequity by design. And so the things that we see today and the things that we experience today did not come by accident. And so as the old saying goes, they're producing the exact outcomes that they were designed to produce. And the one question I get from most leaders when I meet with them is, Henry, what are the one or two things that we can be doing to turn the tide on race, on these racist systems and things of that nature? And my response is always, well, it wasn't one or two things that got us here, and it's not going to be one or two things that gets us out of here. And so I think that's one of the things that has to be really internalized when we start talking about how do we move beyond where we are and move to a place that is much more equitable, and is that it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be one or two things. It's got to be the same kind of array of things that went into the oppression and suppression of the Black community that goes into the upbuilding of the Black community, and what we think of as racial equity by design. And so it becomes important to understand what went into the racial inequity by design. We think about houses, we think about cars, and these things as being kind of ways we calculate wealth. However, wealth is also can be calculated by whiteness. Whiteness is its own wealth, and folks can use it in certain ways. We've seen whiteness used, like in the Central Park. There's some we can see how it gets used in all kind of ways, but it's also it is also wealth. Most Black folks who ever sold a home, particularly in previous years, many have been told by real estate agents to take down certain things off your wall. Don't make your house seem ethnic, or don't even allow the person that's visiting to know that you're Black. And so, the easiest way to raise the value of a home is to, if you move a Black person out, is to move a white person in. And so you have to understand that this idea of moving beyond where we are now is not going to be easy. It's going to take a whole lot. But I want to, as I kind of spend the remainder of my time, I want to bring it really here locally, because one of the questions has been around, well, what about Durham? And Durham really did at its height. Durham had more wealth than any Black community in the United States. Durham was the capital of the Black middle class. Durham had more Black millionaires per capita than any other place in the United States. As you know, Jim Crow was a beast in the South, yet you had Black people moving from other parts of the country to Durham. I mean, even from up north. And so that gives you some sense of just how unique this place was, that you had Black folks, even in the midst of Jim Crow South, moving down here and deciding that they wanted to be here. And so all those kind of things that went into upbuilding that wealth. If you ever ride up Fayetteville Street, you see the stately homes that were occupied by our leaders, the founders of North Carolina Central and North Carolina Mutual and McKanson Farmers, and a whole array of other businesses that would kind of shock you. Well, I will give credit where credit is due, and by all measures, it seems that the Duke family had an incredible impact on suppressing some of the kind of racial hostilities that were seen elsewhere. 1898, we had the Wilmington Race Massacre, which ERUUF had a program some time ago that I had a benefit of taking part in. So you had down in Wilmington, 2 hours away, now 120 miles away, where you had a white mob go in and tear up the city that was majority Black at the time, burn down Black businesses. You had of course, in 1921, the Tulsa race riots, where they went in and just bombed the city and displaced, injured 7,000 Blacks, and killed hundreds of Black, destroyed homes and businesses. In the what's called the Red Summer in 1919, Chicago and 40 other towns across the United States were destroyed. I mean, so you had all those different things that were going on around the country. Yet here in Durham, you did not have those things. And so I think that we have to, kind of pay some respect to that it wasn't the massacres, it wasn't the burn downs, it wasn't those kind of things that struck us. However, I do want to make note that in around 1921, 22, North Carolina Mutual Insurance actually built a brand new building for their new headquarters in downtown Durham. That building happened to be 1 story taller than any other building in downtown Durham, including all the white business buildings. That building, the first North Carolina Mutual new building downtown, ended up getting burned down. And so when North Carolina Mutual rebuilt itself, it made sure that it rebuilt itself 1 story less than the highest white building in downtown. And so I don't want to ever paint Durham as being somehow that it was totally disconnected from some of the same hostilities, but it wasn't lynchings, it wasn't burn-ins as you saw elsewhere. However, what we do know is that there was another way that ended up destroying the wealth in Durham. And Durham, for the most part, from around 1868 to about 1967, really was the leading Black entrepreneurial hub in the United States. But around 1958 or so, and this is after some of the Duke family had died off and some other things, that is when the whole urban renewal movement came. And urban renewal wasn't something that was just happening in Durham. In fact, Black folks all across the country ended up calling urban renewal urban removal, because all across the country, these state and local governments got access to all kind of federal money to build new highway systems to create jobs and opportunity. But all across the country, those highways just happened to, if you see my air quotes, just happened to go through the middle of Black communities. I mean, right through the heart of homes, right through the heart of businesses. And so again, this happened in Richmond, it happened in Birmingham, it happened in Durham, it happened out in LA, that these new highways was built that ran right down the middle of these Black communities and destroyed wealth. I mean, so when we talk about home ownership, destroyed homes by the hundreds here in Durham. Talk about businesses, destroyed businesses by the hundreds in Durham. And part of that, there was a negotiation to say, well, hey, because even though Black folks in Durham were living better than Black folks pretty much any place else, they were still Black folks, which means that their standard of living and quality of life was still very low compared to the overall white community. And so part of the negotiation was, hey, promises were made that if the Black community supports this highway that's going to come through Durham, then your homes, we will rebuild your homes, we'll rebuild your businesses, and they'll be better than ever. And so that was kind of this negotiation that went back and forth. But if you look at some old photos of the Fayetteville Street corridor, right where the Durham Freeway is now, you'll see like this incredible amount of density of homes and houses that were single family homes that were in that area behind what is now the Hayti Heritage Center and things of that nature. Well, when those homes were destroyed, I mean, in the aerial maps you can see of the destruction. When those homes were destroyed, what ended up being replacing those homes ended up being public housing. And we know public housing and single family homes are very different things. And so if you look at when the Durham Freeway went through the middle of the heart of Durham, there was an immediate destruction of wealth that happened in home ownership and business ownership, that if you calculate now, I mean, you're talking now, I mean, it was around 1958 when they started the commission. If you think about now, you're talking about 160 years or so, the wealth accumulation that would have came from that is easily in the billions of dollars that was lost just by running that highway through the Black community. Now by replacing folks from their homes into public housing, you know, early public housing, and I just want to kind of be clear with you, public housing originally was not for Black people. Public housing originally came about because whenever soldiers came back from World War, they started flocking to these cities like San Francisco and places like that to work. There was not enough houses to keep up with that flock of white soldiers coming back from war. And so the government decided they would build these quick homes, these public housing places that whites could live in. And so when whites moved into public housing, and then as the federal government started getting into home ownership, they started providing FHA loans for folks to move out of the public housing into the suburbs. And then Black folks essentially got pushed in there and that ended up kind of being the end game. So that's how you end up with all these public housing complexes with, these Black families shoved into them. And early public housing did not have any rules against, men being in the household. But, the minute it became Black families in there, then all of a sudden men got pushed out. And so I mentioned that as a function of that all these things are happening as a part of, stripping down the foundation of wealth creation, family units and two working parents and all those kind of things, taking away homes and businesses and all that. So those things over time accumulate. And so that's really what we saw with the urban renewal kind of movement was, okay, it wasn't burning down and bombing, but essentially it was another form of destruction of wealth and opportunity. And so as integration happened, integration ended up being what social integration, what Dr. King and others fought for, it ended up being largely one way economically, right? And so essentially the Black dollar left the Black community and went into the white community, but it did not reciprocate. A lot of white people got upset because they felt like, well, why are Blacks upset about the current situation. And so there was a lot more white folks going to Black businesses before integration, and then it stopped. And so, of course, Black folks felt like, well, you've been making me come to the back door all this time, or you won't serve me. I'm gonna show you that you have to serve me. Now, of course, I mean, how does that play out, right? I'm gonna force you to take my money. And a lot of the white businesses will say, wow, this actually works out well. And so I say all that to say that we are in a systematic kind of situation where we have to think about all those things that went into destroying Black wealth and destroying Black families and households and things like that. If we want to think about how do we move forward, and so that's just some context of how we got here, and I want to turn over to Cory to kind of pick up from there.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Thank you so much, Dr. McKoy. Really appreciate that. And before we turn it over to Cory, just want to remind everyone that if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, go ahead and post any questions you have in the chat. We are going to be coming back around to those during our Q&A session. Okay, so really appreciate that, Dr. McKoy, and we're going to get back to we got some questions and some things we want to kind of dig into, but I really appreciate that you kind of laid some foundations there. So next up, we want to talk with Cory Hogans. So Cory Hogans was appointed by the Durham City Council to the city's Racial Equity Task Force in 2018. He is a lifelong educator, and after his selection to participate in one of the early cohorts of the Teaching Fellows program, he went on to become a Principal Fellow and earn a doctorate in Educational Administration and Supervision. He is a community volunteer with the 100 Black Men of Durham, organizing against racism, You Could Vote, and is active in historical research and cultivation with the OCTS Lincoln Alumni Association. So I want to welcome Dr. Hogans. Take it away.
Well, thank you, Chris, for that introduction, and thank you, Mary, for your introduction earlier. It was a wonderful context to know the work that your community, your congregation is doing, and as always, it's always a pleasure to hear and learn from Dr. McKoy, who gave us a great, I think, overview of how we got to the present moment. And I always enjoy being with my colleague Camryn Smith as well, who will talk a little bit later. So I really appreciate this opportunity to participate in this conversation and to share the work of the task force in our efforts to address racial inequities here in Durham. You as a community, ERUUF, are answering the call with programs like this to make, I think, Durham a better place. I want to kind of paint a quick data picture from my vantage point as an educator. There's data that suggests that or presents that 18% of Black children and 30% of Latinx children live below the poverty line in Durham. This is larger than the state rate and disproportionate to ethnic groups, across the city. These children grow into adults who continue the cycle of generational poverty. And although there's a housing shortage in Durham, white and Asian home values are 39 to 60% greater than that in Black and Latinx households. This creates a ripple effect for our community. 30% of children raised in poverty do not finish high school. People who do not earn a high school diploma by the age of 20 are 7 times more likely to be persistently poor between the ages of 25 and 30. And children who grow up impoverished complete fewer years of schooling and earn much lower income than people who do not grow up what we would define as poor. Children who grow up poor in the U.S. are more likely to be in poor health. And all of this stratifies along racial lines in Durham. I am going to present an overview of the Racial Equity Task Force report and our process. And my specific focus this evening will be on wealth and economy. And I understand you have a series of panels that will pick up on some of the other focus areas as well. As Dr. McKoy has so brilliantly overviewed, Durham is a little over 150 years old, born out of the Reconstruction era, and colored very much by the racial dynamics of that time. Its inequities, as I had mentioned earlier, still exist and persist to this day and stratifies along racial lines. We as members of the Racial Equity Task Force accept that this is not normal, but the consequence of intentional action and in some cases non-action over generations, the pervasive impact of institutional racism as well as cultural racism. This is clear in looking at the history of one of Durham's founding families and its relationship to the Black community for its need of labor for its mills and factories. It is clear in the if one takes a short examination of the history and some would argue destruction of the Hayti community, and that all this has occurred through systems level action, and it will take systems level reaction in order to address it. We define racism as a system that perpetuates whiteness as the cultural and institutional center of American society. Racism is the culprit. Anti-racist action, we believe, is the answer. So recognizing this, the Durham City Council, led by Councilperson Jillian Johnson, convened a task force of citizenry interested in addressing racial inequities in Durham to help in the work of finding solutions to the present moment. 17 diverse citizens as a group, and I want to emphasize that the only criteria was that you were a citizen of Durham. There was no specialized training that was required or necessary for participation in this effort. Just a group of people interested in the issue of inequity and interested in exploring a way out of this history that brought us in Durham to our present moment. So over nearly 2 years, a 21-month period, the Durham Racial Equity Task Force engaged in intensive study, reflecting on our own lived experiences, consulting with scholars and scholarly work, networking with other municipalities who were either engaged or were beginning to engage the question of this work, and engaging our own community in seeking input to provide recommendations across a variety of areas: wealth and economy, criminal legal system, health and environmental justice, housing, education, and public history across the landscape of Durham. This work culminated, as Mary shared earlier, in the report that you had the opportunity to review. And in this report, we were seeking to address, develop, and encourage the implementation of policies and actions to aggressively ensure a more equitable Durham community. So our focus tonight are the recommendations around wealth and economy, and a conversation that we would like to have around that. So our recommendations rest on the need to have baseline data on the picture of the present moment, which, you know, Dr. McKoy provided us with a historical context. But, you know, the racial wealth gap, we need data on what that looks like. How is wealth presented across groups in Durham? What is business ownership, and looking at race, ethnicity, and gender across the community? What do city contracts look like in terms of how they are distributed? The racial distribution, of positions in the city workplace. What is the availability of credit or opportunity for Black and Latinx communities to kind of push through those barriers to business ownership and wealth generation? We had 3 recommendations. The first, we recommend that our city engage with local partners to create a racial equity fund. The work of equity is substantial and needs commitment in the form of funds and money to fund the tasks and projects needed to sustain an equity filter across all areas of Durham's life. I really was moved by Dr. McKoy's statement of when presented with the question of what are the 1 or 2 things that we need to do? Well, there weren't 1 or 2 things that got us in this particular predicament. So it needs to be, as I mentioned earlier, systems level approach. And we believe that a racial equity fund would assist in moving forward with those tasks and projects so that equity is not seen as an afterthought or a box that gets checked on a list after a project has been completed. The next recommendation that we put forward was that we recommend that our city leadership take an active role in helping push forward national policies aimed at ending the racial wealth gap, including a national reparations program, guaranteed basic income, and raising the minimum wage. Our last recommendation was around asking, having that city and county leaders establish a municipal guaranteed jobs program to end working poverty in Durham, much in line like with the Federal Jobs Guarantee Development Act. Racial equity work in the city of Durham, we believe, must be permanent, appropriately funded, and institutionally supported by the city, county, and all stakeholders and citizens in Durham. With that, there needs to be, we firmly believe, in order for that to happen, an accountability structure to ensure the long-term sustainability of carrying out this work. Now, we recognize that there are challenges and limitations to pursuing these recommendations. For example, the source of revenue. Where is this, where and how will this redistribution, of wealth to occur? Our perspective on that is that we were to dream big and that the logistics were to follow that. And that also there is the challenge of how do we make sure that the communities that will be most impacted by these changes are involved in the conversations. So how do communities of color, how are they involved in these conversations, given that they would be mostly impacted by it? So with the work of the task force, there has been some action since our report, as well as action by the council during the course of the work that we were engaged in. We gave a report midway, and then also at the conclusion of our time together. For example, the City Council was piloting a basic income program The affordable housing unit on Willard Street I think is getting ready to come online. The city is actively working to evolve the work of the Racial Equity Task Force into a permanent Racial Equity Commission to help ensure the work. And our city council has made a statement, a formal statement as it relates to reparations. But most importantly, forums like this one, where citizens such as yourself answer the call. It's individuals, it's neighborhoods, it's institutions and communities that work to become partners and participants, excuse me, in the struggle to end racism. Going back to that data picture that I painted earlier, you know, children from lower income families born into poverty and generational poverty are more likely than children from wealthier backgrounds to have lower test scores, to have higher risk of dropping out of school. Those who are fortunate to complete high school are less likely to attend college than students from higher income families. For some children, the effects of poverty can be a cycle, and it's generational. High school dropouts in North Carolina are around 6 times more likely to enter prison than their peers. And data from the US Census Bureau found that 16 to 24-year-olds who dropped out of high school were 6 times more likely to be institutionalized than other high school graduates. We oftentimes like to kind of tout education as the way out, but it takes a variety of systems to be able to work in place to counter the impacts of racism, and particularly to counter how these outcomes stratify along racial lines. Racism exists, it has a history, it persists, but it can be disrupted, certainly through forums and actions such as what your community is attempting to undertake, our community is attempting to undertake. I thank you for this time and this opportunity to overview our report and to share a little bit about our process and how we went about generating the report. And I look forward to the conversation this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hogans. So I want to remind everyone again to post any questions that you have in the YouTube or Facebook chat. And again, we're going to get to that. We're going to get to the Q&A towards the end. But next up, we want to talk with Camryn Smith. You know, as a proud resident of Oldies, Durham, a community activist and organizer, she is one of the founding members of the and the executive director of Communities in Partnership, or CIP. She has been serving in place-based development work for over 20 years, both stateside and abroad. Camryn is a current Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Culture of Health leader, co-chair of the Organizing Against Racism in Durham, as well as a member of the Racial Equity Task Force for the City of Durham and the Built to Last Durham Compact Board of Advisors. She is also on the steering committee of the Equitable Food Oriented Development, which is a national collaborative food system organization. We want to welcome Camryn. Really appreciate being here.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. I believe I was going to share just a couple of slides. My intention is to be able to share from more of a local, in terms of a practitioner-based perspective of how these issues really impact Black and Brown communities on the ground, and especially in terms of what we're having to deal with with COVID, and how there's a saying in our community, if white folks have a cold, black and brown folks have pneumonia. Well, when COVID hit, we went from pneumonia to the ventilator, and and we're, you know, close to needing some assistance with just being able to even last the night. And so wanted to have a conversation from a real perspective of what's going on here in the community that I love and live in and work in. And so Communities in Partnership is a predominantly Black and woman and femme identifying led organization. We focus on liberative economic developments at the intersections of social determinants of health that center descendants of the African diaspora. And so we're located place-based, started off here in Old East Durham, which is one of the many neighborhoods located in Northeast Central Durham, right in the city center neighborhood rings of neighborhoods that surround downtown Durham. And our vision is we envision East Durham and the surrounding areas as a vibrant place where all residents have an exceptional quality of life, with the economic and political power to impact decision-making that affects their community. And our mission is to organize and cultivate long-term residents, especially residents of color and low wealth, to work towards racial, economic, and social liberation. And so just wanted to give you a little data on the ground. We've been very blessed in Communities in Partnership to be able to partner with a lot of wonderful academic researchers, one of which is Dr. Henry McKoy, who you heard from earlier. But also we have a community-based participatory research relationship that actually was introduced to us by Dr. McKoy. We owe him a lot of gratitude for a lot of help in us being able to stay on top of our data here in the neighborhood. But we have fairly long-term relationships with organization or a group of researchers called the Keenan Collaboratory. We call them the Collaboratory. It's 3 researchers that were from Duke, UNC, and NC State. That work to actually help us in developing a system for us that would help us with the democratization of data as we collected data on our community, and how we can actually turn that to tell our story in a more succinct way, but also making sure that we kept a human component while we were able to use those tools to organize ourselves towards what we knew what was best for our community and ourselves. And I'm sorry, I have my grand corgi dog is here. She's barking, and I apologize for that. She's a little animated. So I'm sorry about that in the background. So anyway, how COVID has kind of impacted CIP is just really has been an astounding, it's really been a huge impact on our community, to say the least. And of course, as most people know, if you look at the data in terms of outcomes concerning COVID transmission, in terms of also impact on jobs security, impact on just mental health stressors and things of that nature, Black and Brown community members, specifically Black and Brown community members who struggle inside intergenerational poverty, have been at the ones who've been the most directly impacted in the most horrific ways. And so since then, we wanted to go back and take a look at some of the data that was surrounding a lot of our folks in our community, and also what we were doing in terms of our impacts that we were actually seeing on the ground, how that was actually equaling out into some of the things that we were seeing. And so in terms of the economic stability in our community for overall Durham County in 2018, and mind you, this data is fairly outdated. We have had new data. The county of Durham has had an increase in AMI, average median income, but specifically for city center neighborhoods, for city center Durham and city center ring neighborhoods, that this threshold for income has just skyrocketed. It's way more than this. But in Durham County in 2018, you can see it was a little under $60,000 for the county, the AMI and the county-wide, while in Old East Durham, specifically in 2018, it was hovering right around between $24,000 and $25,000 AMI per household. And so that there's a huge stark difference. You have less, the households in Old East Durham historically and traditionally making less than half of their counterparts. One of the things that we have seen was some of the newest data that we had was able to get, that we were able to actually get from some of the reports that came in surrounding the economic measuring the economic viability and a lot of the resurgence in economic development in downtown Durham. It had the AMI over the last summer at hovering somewhere between 89 and 91,000 in terms of AMI for annual average median income for households in downtown Durham and city center neighborhoods. While we have not been able to re-up our data since 2019 in terms of doing the neighborhood survey, but we have been asking in terms of people attending our co-ops, people attending our farmers market, things of that nature, in terms of their increase in income. And for most of the people that we surveyed, there has been a dramatic drop in income, especially since COVID. And so because of the high rate of food service and service provider jobs that we have, or gig economy workers, our residents here in Old East Durham are much more likely to be out of work or have faced huge economic hardships during COVID. We have a substantial number of folks in our community who are way behind on their rent, CIP. We own property here in our community, and we have tenants in our property who were behind on their rent before COVID, and when the onset of COVID, it's even placed them even further behind. And so we're very concerned about the potential for displacement and the evictions that are looming overhead, and really are asking for our public officials to kind of get behind the wheel, and also our judges. I know Judge Pat Evans is going to play an instrumental role in trying to get this off the ground so we can have some things in place to keep people from being displaced. The other point that we want to talk about is healthcare and access. We have a high rate of diabetes in our community. The overall average rate in Durham County is right at 13%. In our community, it's right at 19%. And 61% of the residents in our community have 3 or more COVID-19 risk factors that make it difficult for them to endure and or recover from COVID-19, which is an astounding data point as well. And then education and access quality. The metric is a Black bachelor's degree. Durham County, we have a high rate of folks receiving a bachelor's degree or above. We have 41%, right, a little over 41% of Durham County residents have a bachelor's degree or above. And in Old East Durham, the number is astoundingly different. It's 6.4%, which makes obtaining obtaining jobs that actually pay a living wage or higher, that also include benefits and other supports, almost near impossible for people that historically have lived in our community. And so our resiliency and our response from a CIP perspective has been, we have since 2017 had a community-run food co-op. We provide fresh and local produce and protein items, as well as community education and advocacy. Over 80% of our food and all of our food programs, initiatives that we actually purchased from Black and Indigenous farmers. Our members pay $5 a month. They volunteer time. Pre-COVID, they volunteered time to help run and keep the co-op running real smoothly. But when we had the pandemic, we had to scale up those initiatives and those efforts. So what we did was we did away with $5 a month that people had to pay, and we opened it up. Pre-pandemic, we had around 300 households, 300 to 350 households that were co-op members. Now we have, I think we're reaching pretty much between 650 to 700 households every month. We increased the number of co-ops that we had from once a month, because this was just a bridge to help and with an infusion of fresh and local produce, from once a month to every other week. And now we have kind of scaled back a little bit to having it twice a month. And in addition to that, we also have our farmers market that we launched in the summer of 2020. It was supposed to be our pivot point from a charity-based model, moving over to a more developmental, sustainable model. We went ahead and launched that in the middle of COVID, during the middle of the pandemic, and seeing great success. We have a double bucks program that's unlimited double bucks for SNAP and EBT benefit and folks that receive WIC or subsidized services and also live in subsidized housing. We partner with Blue Cross Blue Shield Corporation to be able to supply those recipients with 50% discount on all of their fresh and local produce grown, all of that grown by Black and brown farmers, as well as fresh food staple items and dry goods. And we're about to launch moving that from once a month to twice a month, so that we can actually have that model in place as a more sustainable model. And then, of course, I mentioned that we have our housing that we own in our community, and we were able to partner with Self-Help. Self-Help has been a partner in our housing development to provide rent-free housing to residents during this time, and helping to connect them to other social service or opportunities for them to be able to subsidize their rent payments during this time in COVID. And Self-Help has been a great help in that. We have an entrepreneur and workforce development. We always have had something where we're focusing on entrepreneurs of color. We have the Culinary Femme Collective, which is a group of BIPOC food, woman and femme identifying entrepreneurs who do food-based entrepreneurship, and that are building a collaborative organization, a network of a cooperative network for wealth building strategies that aren't predicated on the highly oppressive general practices that are all enveloped into the food system. And so that has been a really good success for our entrepreneurs to experience while they're in that space. But we also had to launch the Thriving Communities Fund, which was a group of 5 organizations that came together. It was Dr. McKoy at NCCU, it was Keith Daniel, a part of Resilient Ventures, In Poverty Durham, Episcopalians United Against Racism, and Communities in Partnership. And to date, we have raised over $100,000 to provide bridge funding and re-startup capital for some businesses who've had to go out of business due to COVID, specifically targeting BIPOC, food-based entrepreneurs and other BIPOC businesses as well. And then in full fashion of who we are as a community in CIP, we identify and equip directly impacted members of our communities with the knowledge and skills required to be effective organizers and leaders. And so we're steeped in anti-racism and anti-oppressive practices, community-based education and learning opportunities. We also couple that with some more quote unquote practical helps. We have a strong relationship with the Continuing Education Division at Durham Technical Community College under the auspices and leadership of Candace Rashada Mujahid, who helps us guide and help folks navigate that system in terms of anything from resume development, dressing for interviews, how to interview properly, all the way to different credentials, taking skills or a career assessment test to see what their skills and passions are. And so we look at the whole individual in terms of building capacity so that people can navigate the system, while at the same time they can learn how to actually tear down the oppressive structures within inside that system as well. And CIP has also been able to partner with multiple philanthropic and larger scale national NGOs in terms of our community rooted processes and helping organizations and institutions wanting to do community rooted work on the ground to pivot from that charity based model to a more capacity building model. Because to be honest with you, if we had a more capacity developmental model in the beginning, we would not see a lot of these outcomes and this devastating impact that we're seeing right now. COVID just basically shone a huge light on the disparities and the economic injustices and the racialized systems that were already existing. And so people have been wanting to listen, and so we've risen to the occasion to share some of our methodology and even have developed a training that we can engage with organizations and communities in showing them the way that we do the community rooted work. And so just to end, part of the reason why, this work is so important, and I was so grateful that Mary asked me to share, I was a member of the Racial Equity Task Force. And one of the things that we really, really focused on was really hitting home the need Americans have an addiction, or Western civilization has an addiction to charity. That needs to stop. It doesn't mean that we stop engaging in charitable acts, because we have to do a both and. But if we do not come to terms with the reasons why we need to have charity in the first place, and how do we create systems, how do we create wealth opportunities, because as Dr. McKoy has stated in his data, in terms of the reimagining Hayti and the overall wealth that the Black community had during Jim Crow and during Reconstruction versus now, we are quickly regressing. And so we are dedicated to building systems that are created by, for, and with people who've been directly impacted. And in the case of Communities of Partnership, we are centering the descendants of formerly enslaved African peoples, but we are also very dedicated to partnering and walking alongside of our Indigenous brothers and sisters, as well as our Latinx community members and other immigrant communities as well. So we believe that people who've been most directly impacted have the tools for their own liberation. They actually have the skill set. They just need the resources that were intentionally extracted from them to actually be able to move forward and create a new reality that would benefit everybody. So thank you so much, Chris and Mary. Appreciate it. Allowing me to share.
All right, thank you so much. So we are so grateful for all the work that you are all doing. So we want to take this time to go ahead and move into our question and answer time portion of the event. So what we want to do is I'm going to throw out some questions. We got a lot of questions coming in now, and if we'll kind of allow anyone who feels compelled, any of you to speak up and talk about it. So one of the things that I wanted to address from the questions that we got was, in this time, and COVID is a big issue, and I know that it was talked about a lot, and that requires some public-private ventures, and so a lot of questions were about, how do public-private ventures play a part in how we address economic inequality in Durham. And if you have anything to say on that, please. Henry.
Let me jump in quick. I think it's an important question, right? But it also, you have to understand that it's two sides of that, public and private, right? And if you look at how the public sector engages largely with different populations within their community, they operate differently, right? And so there has been things put on the books. There have been structures and programs that create on-ramps for white folks from the private sector to partner alongside the public sector to get access to resources, incentives, all those kind of things. It really doesn't, that same kind of bridge has not been created for the Black community. Largely what you see, and I know Camryn's heard me say this plenty of times, is that and again, this is not just conjecture. I mean, I looked at the actual budgets of the city and county of Durham over the last decade, and what you found was that the kind of investments that are made out of the public sector that we all, I'm a taxpayer, Camryn's a taxpayer, you all a taxpayer, Cory's a taxpayer. When those public dollars connect to the white community, they largely connect in ways that create wealth, right? That means that there's something going on. So maybe there's an economic development project. We want to turn this old building into a hotel downtown or something. We've seen plenty of that. White developers come into town or in town, and they say, hey, I want to build this. I have some money already, but I can't get the return I want. I can get maybe 15, 20% return, but I need 25% return to get my investors excited. What can the public sector do to help me get there? And there's this kind of negotiation back and forth, and that happens, and then kind of everybody considers it a win of sorts. When it comes to Black and other people of color, that model has not been so that model hasn't been welcome when it comes to the Black community, right? It's become a situation where in those communities, the public investment tends to further tether the Black or brown communities to social services. And so it's more like, well, hey, we're open up a new community center for you or something that standpoint. We'll take this old building and do a community center. So that's not wealth creation. I mean, it may be valuable to the community, but in and of itself, it can't solve the problem. And so I think that that's one of the things that we've been pushing for the longest time is for that kind of implicit bias that public sectors have against these kind of public-private partnerships with people of color, which they tend to look on with some level of distrust or or skepticism, to really get rid of that. I mean, because that is one of the lever points that can believe can make a difference in wealth creation.
Thank you. Camryn or Cory, would you like to throw anything in?
Sure. I'll add to the point that I referenced earlier about one of the focus points. Camryn can speak to this a little bit too in our conversations with the Racial Equity Task Force. Is equity is a way of seeing, right? Being anti-racist is a way of being, and in order to advance beyond sort of the afterthought thinking, right? That when you're looking at how funds are going to be deployed, and the basic question is, in terms of when you see racism, how do you disrupt it? Well, how does this affect Black people, right? How does this affect brown people, right? How do we make that filter a consistent part of our processes? Because remember what Dr. McKoy was saying earlier. So I think brilliantly, it wasn't one or two things that's created the present moment. So it's going to take a multitude and a system of things in order to counter it. So that equity filter is essential for approaching things like that.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's jump into another subject. There was a couple of questions coming out about gentrification, and as a sort of I want to kind of leave it broader. I want to know how is that affecting the work that you're doing, or how is it affecting directly, especially in this time of COVID, where another question was asked about the eviction crisis that is ongoing and probably going to get worse. How has gentrification affected that?
How has gentrification impacted the work that we're doing?
Yes.
So gentrification has been impacting the work that we've been doing for quite some time. And so, I mean, I think most people probably on this call are very familiar with downtown Durham. And if you know anything about Northeast Central, Cleveland, Holloway, and Golden Belt are the first two, when you're coming from downtown, the first two neighborhoods that you enter into, which were ground zero probably 7-10 years ago for the beginnings of gentrification. And so these were neighborhoods that people would not throw a rock at, would not want to come through or anything else. They had a lot of substandard and dilapidated housing. You were able, especially 10, 12, 15 years ago, you were able to purchase housing for $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, renovate it, and to be able to have an extremely affordable house. Now, for folks in the white community, oftentimes who have flexible capital or more liquid assets to be able to purchase that, because most banking institutions will not loan you money for a $10,000 or $15,000 or $20,000 house. And so who was able to take advantage of that, who's still able to take advantage of that, where there's very few left, but is predominantly white folks that are able to come in and have that much liquid capital to be able to purchase those houses and turn them around. And so what has ended up happening is move further east into our neighborhood, into the Albright community, which borders with Cleveland Holloway, into Old Five Points, which borders Old North Durham and Duke Park. And so my neighborhood is right next to Albright on the other side of Holloway, right in smack dab in the middle of Northeast Central Durham. And we have one of the largest neighborhoods of historic housing stock in terms of old homes that can be renovated in Northeast Central Durham. And so currently what started happening probably 5 to 7 years ago was people buying up the old houses and renovating them. Then we had a phase 3 to 4 years ago where they were tearing down old houses and building new houses that look old. So now we're in the process, and those were around 300,000 to 400,000, maybe 425 at the most. Now we're in the phase of them tearing down whatever old structures are left and building brand new, ultra modern McMansions is what I call them, because they look to be anywhere between 2,800 to 4,000 square feet, and they're going between $550,000 to $650,000. And so that's what's happening. I mean, when people drive through here who haven't been through the neighborhood in many years, they're just like, we cannot believe what's going on. And so the problem is, it's making folks that live here who will have the privilege to purchase their houses rich homeowners. Now, for us, you know, there's a couple of us that are people of color, specifically Black folks that bought, and we bought it real low. That's great, but I didn't move into this neighborhood for the folks to be displaced, and I didn't move into this neighborhood to become a rich homeowner. I moved into this neighborhood to actually be with my people and to be able to build capacity towards stated goals, a common identity, a common framework for us to be able to enjoy a quality of life that benefits everyone. And so when you start displacing people, that is dramatically hampered. So now we have people that are moving in, oftentimes very well-meaning, highly progressive folk. But when they come in, they're coming into a place that's very foreign to them. And we all have biases and prejudices. And so how white folks or how gentrifiers, and because gentrifiers can be any color, not just white people, interact in the systems is they actually call on systems that traditionally have not had a positive impact, like the policing system, like the social service system, when you're calling, you know, on people who you don't think they're parenting properly, things of this nature, without having any context or relationship with anybody here in the community. And so there is not only a systemic issue in terms of how gentrification negatively impacts our community, but also there's an interrelational, whether people really realize it or not, because you're in relationship whether or not you recognize it. It just depends upon the level of relationship, or whether it's a positive or negative force for that community or for the people that you live with. And so it's played a huge role in how our neighborhood and it is a little bit at odds right now. We have you know, 2 neighborhood listservs. And so one is the gentrifying listserv, and so one is not. And so it gets pretty interesting at times. So yeah.
So yeah, thank you so much. And I appreciate it, because you know, the community that me and my wife just moved into, it's we're dealing with some of the similar things. So the quick before I pass it on to see if either Cory or Dr. Henry would like to talk about this. Camryn, could you tell us about how we access the co-op?
Yeah, and I'm going to link it in the chat too. So yeah, the co-op right now is housed at Antioch Baptist Church, which is Reverend Michael Page's church, is at 1450 Holloway Street. We are actually in process because we've entered into agreement with the city. We've rented the old impacting building, which is the old Driver Street fire station, and we'll be hosting the co-op out of there hopefully in the spring. And so if folks are part of our listserv or sign up for our emails, they'll get notification of that. And we're actually going to move the farmers market over there, because we've been partnering with Seeds in their space to host the farmers market. And we're going to try to move both to our community so that folks can walk to it a little easier and get there in terms of transportation much easier. But anybody is welcome. Once folks, especially our elders, we had a lot of elders that were volunteering, and when COVID hit, we had to ask them to just stay on the sidelines, and we gave them a little bit of at-home work to do and things. But as soon as folks get their shot and the numbers start going down a little bit, and especially making sure that those other viral strains are at bay, we want our elders from the community to come back and volunteer. We'll welcome you back with open arms. We just want to make sure it's safe for everyone. And then in terms of the farmers market, I'll put the link in there. Anybody can order from the farmers market. It's fresh, and it's some of the best produce, and I would hold our produce up against any Whole Foods or anybody else. And it's all been grown by Black and Indigenous farmers, and you're supporting them. And so, and also excellent dry good items that we have as well, and eggs and some other protein, some freshly organic meat and things of that nature. So please feel free to participate in that, and also pass along if you know folks also that receive subsidized benefits so that they can take advantage of that as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And so quickly, Cory or Henry, would you like to talk about, your thoughts on gentrification in Durham?
Well, I mean, I think, I think Camryn summed it up very, very well in a lot of ways. I mean, we know it's here. I mean, you can, if you ride through like the Fayetteville Street Corridor or South Roxborough, places like that, I mean, you know, it's interesting. You see one day, you know, a bunch of houses that look basically alike, and then you come back a week later and there's like, you know, 2 or 3 houses stuck into these places. And so the thing about gentrification is that, I mean, you know, folks are, I mean, they want to be in Durham, and I always, one of the things I say about Durham sometimes is that, you know, Durham in some ways is a caricature of itself, meaning that you know, it's the idea that you know, we're this equitable, diverse, inclusive place that you know, kind of where everybody you know, kind of knows each other's name and sings along, you know, as the old saying goes. But you know, one of the things that gentrification is driving is it's driving you know, certain folks out, other folks in. And so the very thing that is supposed to be cool about Durham is supposed to be, you know, what folks are attracted to Durham is the very thing that gentrification is really you know, putting at odds in terms of this diverse community and things of that nature. So like I said, I think Camryn, you know, summed it up perfectly.
Yes, I'll add that I think Camryn summed it up very well, but if there's anything that I would add, and I'm not a native Durham person. I've been a resident of Durham probably about a little over 15 years, my wife and I, and we've raised our children here and have just fallen in love with Durham. But I would say that, you know, my thoughts on gentrification, I mean, if you drive through parts of Durham, you can see the history of Durham. You know, you can see the impact of renewal efforts. And I would just remind us of kind of, you know, one of the focus points in our report is about the study of whiteness, right? The study of racism. And if you don't have that awareness or not open to it, then you are going to do things like what Camryn's described and use systems to perpetuate the very thing that you think you are. I don't want to say helping, because I think Dr. McKoy said it when you talked about Durham being a caricature of itself, that part of what has happened from my observation is this commodifying of certain aspects of Durham, which has in some ways been very, very good for Durham, right? You know, DPAC is, you know, there have been some things that have been very, very positive, but if you drive, you know, in one direction, you know, away from the $1 million condos, then you're looking at a very, very different experience. And you know, you have to ask yourself, well, how does this benefit everyone, right? And how does everyone, those who are experiencing the pain, as our fearless leader, Judge O'Neill, has stated over and over again, those who are feeling the pain, how are they benefiting from that? So I think Camryn said it beautifully.
Yeah, thank you so much. So with that, I have a question here about Black entrepreneurs. And I want to follow that up with a question of my own. But are there Black entrepreneurs in Durham with ideas for jobs creating startups delayed by lack of financing? And are there ideas to make financing available from traditional and non-traditional sources?
Well, I say, well, I mean, the easy answer to that is absolutely. There's Black entrepreneurs with ideas and things of that nature. I mean, that's in Durham, that's across the state, that's across the country that can't get access to capital. So, you know, the last question talked about gentrification, but there's also, you know, we've also seen commercial gentrification, right? Where, I mean, if you were here in Durham some years ago, I mean, there were a lot more Black businesses in downtown Durham and in certain places. I mean, those things have gone as well. I mean, I've seen, you know, the Blue Coffee Cafe get pushed out and displaced. I've seen these things from that standpoint. And so, you know, really there's never been an issue of I mean, in a broader sense of talent in the Black community, right? Whether that be entrepreneurship or whatever. The question is, you know, what kind of resources does that talent have to essentially develop itself? You know, and so, you know, as I mentioned before, in a capitalist society, capital matters, and capital becomes a way by which, you know, folks control other folks. And it's largely been a way by which, you know, white folks that control Black communities in one way or another is through, you know, capital and what's, and, you know, this kind of, you know, idea of, you know, how that capital gets distributed and things of that nature. And so, you know, I think that's, you know, really in a real significant way, you know, what's at the heart of this, right? I mean, you know, we can, let me give you kind of a quick kind of statistic to think about. So we know 1968 to be a very, you know, historic year, right? Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated April 4th, 1968. Robert Kennedy was, you know, killed a little thereafter, but also something else happened in 1968 that kind of went unnoticed, but had a huge impact. So the laws were passed in 1968 that actually are what essentially established kind of what we know now to be the 501c3 nonprofit marketplace, right? Let me tell you why they actually got started. It actually has some connection here to Durham and some of the Black power movements here in Durham and the North Carolina Fund, things of that nature. Foundations that were supportive of kind of the Black community were basically, you know, giving money directly to Black folks and saying, hey, you know, go figure this out. A politician here, Jim Gardner in North Carolina, actually, Representative Jim Gardner actually went back to Washington and said he was concerned about these radical Black folks in North Carolina. They then passed laws that basically created what we know now to be the 501c3 structure. And I keep in mind now, basically what they're saying is that in order for you not to get money from any foundation, you got to send a letter to the federal government on what you want, what kind of organization you want to have. They got to approve it, send it back to you, and so it's a level of control. Now we have an incredible, you know, huge, you know, kind of, you know, charitable community, but that's something that I think goes back to what Camryn said. I mean, you know, in some ways that is set up to control, right? And so, you know, when you have laws put in place like that, so much of the capital that comes into Black America now, one way or another, I mean, comes in the form of charity of some sorts, right? And it's only been recently where, I mean, there's really been an emphasis on the idea of supporting Black founded and Black led charitable organizations. I mean, I would say before, when you look at certain kind of statistics, if you were a white person serving black kids or Black folks, and you could write your golden ticket. If you were a Black person doing the same, you might starve to death. And so I say that just to say that you know, the question has never been about whether folks have this talents or skills or the ideas, but you know, nobody's going to beat their head against the wall forever if I can't get capital as a certain kind of entrepreneur. And it's not because I don't have the talent, it's just because folks aren't willing to invest in me. Sooner or later, I'm gonna go, you know, another way, and I'm just gonna do something different. And so, you know, I give you kind of a quick anecdote. So I was doing some research a couple of years ago, and I was talking to some people, some older folks who, you know, might call them old heads, like 78, 80 years old folks now that live in Hayti, and they grew up in Hayti, right? And they were telling these stories about how, you know, all this energy and things around Hayti, and they would say, yeah, I wanted to grow up and I want to do X, Y, Z, and do this, that. I mean, these big ideas. And my question was, well, you know, why did you think you could do that, right? And they said, well, because I looked around and I saw it. And because I saw it, I thought I could do it. Whereas now, I teach at a historically Black college in the middle of the historic Hayti, and I teach in a business school, and I teach entrepreneurship. Yet the ideas that a lot of my students come to me with are things that they see around them. I still get a kind of an overwhelming number of barbershops and beauty salons and things like that. Now, I need a barbershop. Well, I don't need as much as now as I used to, but you know, barbershops have been good in my life. You know, beauty salons, all those things are important, but you can't build a whole economy off of just those kind of businesses. But yet, that's what they see folks are being able to create. And so it does matter what the society produces when it comes to, you know, what the next generation sees themselves producing. And we have to align the incentives with the ideas. So we have to have the ability for you know, Black folks and brown folks to have all kind of ideas, and someone will succeed, someone won't. But that's how you that's how you create a better economy overall, and a more creative and innovative society, is by having diverse people come up with diverse ideas and funding those things.
Awesome, thank you. Did Cory or Camryn, did you want to throw in anything else there? Okay, so
just to highlight, just real quick, I mean, you know, how can you add to what Dr. McKoy has just shared? But just to underscore that Jim Gardner example, that's an example of whiteness and white supremacy manifesting itself, and the impact speaks for itself.
I will break it down just a little more. Basically, what it's saying is Black people cannot be trusted to take care of themselves and do what will bring about the creation of systems that aren't predicated on charity. That's what they're saying. That because they'll view it as just a never-ending vicious cycle, when in actuality, what was actually happening on the ground in our communities back then was anything but that. And so, yeah.
What's funny, you know, just to pick up on that, you know, I think the funniest commercial I saw during Super Bowl was that Eminem commercial, right? And they talking, you know, and the lady says, "Well, I'm sorry, I call you Karen," and she said, "Well, my name is Karen," and because essentially what we've seen is you know, Karen is kind of that analogous of idea that okay, we cool until you do something that I think, you know, I know better than you, and I want to kind of put you in your place, and that's really been a large part of what Black folks experience in society, right? You know, I mean, it went from, you know, we feel like your place is the actual labor and all these kind of things, to some sense of, hey, well, you know, you really can't be trusted with these resources. You know, I live a very privileged and blessed life now. I admit it, I didn't always live that life, but you know, if my kids have an issue, I have the resources to address those issues, right? And so there's always this sense that you know, let's create an intermediary entity that a white person or a white organization can control, that can basically kind of parse out what we want you know, to happen, right? As opposed to saying, you know, if people actually had real resources in their hands, in their pockets, I mean, they could really, I mean, Camryn said this earlier, I mean, they could solve their own problems. I mean, and there wouldn't have to be this negotiation of a dance of, you know, because that takes you down a whole different level of road of, you know, having to kind of pull on people's heartstrings and guilt and all this kind of stuff, and it just creates a, you know, something different from what we need, I think, to really move forth in these issues, to really get past them.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much. So, really quick, before we move on to our closing, I just want to give each of you the opportunity to speak to those on Facebook or YouTube right now, and just mention some things, one or two things that you think we can do right now today to make a difference. Again, and I do remember that you said it is not just one or two things, but just, you know, sort of those first steps that some people need to, you know, want to hear to be able to take. So
I offer something, and then I let my great co-panelists say something. So one thing I say, coming from a broad sense, and you know, Camryn brings this up often, we brought it when we were preparing for this, is the fact that, again, I mean, you know, I think one thing that's important, I mean, these aren't really easy questions, right? Again, I mean, these are systematic questions, and so they go very deep. One thing I want to share with the folks in your audience, ERUUF and everybody else, is that, you know, it's going to take some real understanding of what we're faced here. When you start talking about what I found, at least in my engagement with folks, is that, let me kind of frame it like this, right? I have two kids that both, at this point, they're both adults. I love my kids to death, and I do anything I can to help those kids be successful and to move forth in the world, right? Except I will not step on your kid to do that, right? I mean, and that's that's very important for me. It's not to say I won't do everything I can to support my kid, but I'm not gonna put my foot on your kid's neck so my kid can get a little further. And so I think that that's been the difference. If you look at kind of, historically, that's what a suppressive system has been about, right? I want my kids to live a better life and all this other, so we're going to suppress this group. That's one of the biggest challenges to get over this hurdle, right? Is that I believe truly that there's a whole lot of folks in the white community that want to see Black folks have better opportunities and better outcomes, right? But in a world that is about, kind of equal opportunity, that also means there's equal opportunity to fail, just like there's equal opportunity to succeed. And that's the part that becomes the biggest hurdle, is that, the question is how many folks are willing to create a system where them and their kids have an equal chance of failing, just like somebody else, right? And so I think that's been one of the, I think that's the things that we have to really understand, is that, that if you really have an equal society, that, you're creating a society where, you can fail or you can succeed, and so can your family. And so I think that you have to be willing to say that. And I can say honestly, like I said, I've done everything I can to help my kids, and I will continue to. But I'm willing to live in a society where, that the outcomes may not be always favorable. But I'm not sure that the aggregate of the white community has yet come to that point where that they're willing to roll that dice and to change their odds of success. Because if I say I finish on this, if there's one thing I learned, I still learn too, right? When the Brett Kavanaugh, the Brett Kavanaugh trial for Supreme Court, I've been around a long time. I think I'm decently smart, but I really, my mind shifted that day when he was on trial. If he was a Black man, there would have been no way that he would ever got even anywhere close to that, right? But I learned on that day that what America really is about and has been about is we heard in social studies, all that kind of stuff growing up, religious freedom and folks leaving their oppression, all this kind of stuff. But but America was really set up as the place where white men can't fail, and it was designed like that at the start, and that's been the tension since then, right? Which I think is what maybe some of what the attraction of Donald Trump was. Is that, he had the attitude, we should be at the top of the pyramid. But when I watched the Brett Kavanaugh trial, I'm like, okay, this guy can't fail, because everything around him is propping him up to change every rule that's ever been put in place that says this is how we will vet people. So anyway, all that stuff has got to be grappled with for real if we're ever going to see real sustainable change. So thank you all for this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Camryn, would you, Cory.
Well, I was going to offer, if Camryn wanted to go, I didn't want to step in front of you, Camryn.
You can go, that's fine. And that's fine.
Yeah, so, I'll just say, briefly that, one or two things, first understand that addressing racism and countering all of the things that have brought us to the present moment that are incredibly complex. However, it's not something that requires deep thinking or training to be able to counter. It does require an open mind. I think it requires a willingness to learn about racism, to learn about white supremacy and how it manifests, to learn about this idea of whiteness, so that when you see it, you can disrupt it, right? And disruption can look like a lot of different things. It can be simply asking why, why do we have to do things this way? How does this impact, Black communities or brown communities? The cultural sort of United States American society as a culture, its cultural center is sort of white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. And so those individuals who would identify as being white have the luxury of not having to worry about being white, or don't understand the concept of white privilege, which has been studied. I mean, for me, it's always I don't enter into conversations debating about the existence of racism. It's a non-starter, right? Learn about racism, and so that you can recognize it and participate in the conversations towards disrupting it. And I thank you for this opportunity to share this evening.
We so greatly appreciate your contribution. Camryn.
Yes, I just follow up with Dr. McKoy and Dr. Hogans was saying. And so, you know, part of the thing is, and I've been saying this around Durham a lot whenever people ask me, Durham needs to be who we say we are. And so if we say we're this place, that we believe that everyone should have the freedom to be who they are and have equitable access and opportunities to be able to not survive, but to thrive. We have not set up a system in Durham that has actually brought about those outcomes. And so when we look at all this money and all the philanthropic, you know, the nonprofit industrial complex and all this other stuff, and even some of the great folks who have been doing work on the ground, you know, like self-help and other folks, all this work, there have been individual victories that we have had. But in terms of a systemic impact, we have miserably failed. We have a city that has a low rate of overall collective Black wealth in terms of Black business ownership. Burlington, who has a sheriff that is dedicated to basically hunting down the descendants of First Nations people groups, people that they quote unquote call illegal, which nobody can be illegal, by the way. They're human beings. They deserve to be here just like anybody else. But that ideology in that city still has, in terms of the overall ability for Black people to build businesses, it's easier to build a business there than it is here. There's something really wrong with that. There's something really wrong with that picture. And so I think we need to have a real clear conversation about who Durham is and who Durham is not. Because at the same thing, I do believe what Dr. McKoy was saying is I do think we can change, because I do think we have just enough people that kind of start turning the tide. But what it takes is people are going to have to trust people that are in the closest proximity to the direct impact. And what I mean by that is trusting Black folks who actually are accountable to other Black folks, whose boards are led by Black folks, whose organizations are largely run by Black people. The same thing for Indigenous populations, the same thing for Latinx communities. You have to start trusting us, because it's a shame that we have all these degrees and all these, all these letters behind our names, but we do not own anything. We do not own anything. And so what I'm asking is for white progressive Durham to be who white progressive Durham wants to be, because we do have a very finely tuned history. And part of that is to look inward at your own self and understand how whiteness disrupts any sort of positive movement towards parity from communities of color, specifically Black communities. We have a long history in this nation of whiteness reacting extremely violently to Black communities that actually are gaining some sort of economic viability that is independent and wholly dependent upon themselves. So what I'm asking and challenging folks to do is not be those generations from before, but to be the new generation that says no more. We want our Black and brown brothers and sisters to survive. We want them to have wealth. We want their children to enjoy the same access and to be able to build their own schools if they so choose, or to be able to send them to Central, or for them to go to Duke or to go to UNC. We want them to have the same benefits that we have. We want them to have the same healthcare outcomes. We want them to have the same access to beautiful, wonderful housing. We want them to have the same access to know that they have access to fresh food, and to have systems that they benefit from and they own, and that actually other people can take part in and benefit from as well. That's what I'm asking. What that takes is trusting us. What that takes is donating to us. What that takes is, if you are so invited, to come along with us and join with us, because not everybody's ready to come over here and work in East Durham. I'm just being honest with you. And so, you know, from that perspective, really understanding, because from what we have done thus far with the outcomes that we have done, we have just basically wasted billions of dollars because we have not gotten anywhere near the outcomes that we thought we were going to get. People are still starving, they're still dying. We have negatively disproportionate health outcomes and high rates of mental health stressors that have been highly exacerbated by COVID. None of us could have even thought that we would have to go through a pandemic, but this is what we're dealing with. And we need people to be who they say they are and trust us. Trust us.
That's right. Trust. Really appreciate that. This has been amazing. It's just been such a pleasure to have this conversation with you all. Other than, before we move on, is there any contacts that we should pass on to those listening? If so, you can let us know. We can throw that in the chat really quick. No. Okay. All right. So if there is anything, just go ahead and throw that in. Put that in our chat. We'll put it in the chat. Awesome. So thank you. I'm going to pass it on to Mary, but this has been awesome.
Okay. Thank you so much to the panelists, all three of you, for sharing so honestly and forthrightly with us. As a white, I don't hear conversations like this very often. I live in my white bubble, and unless I can have opportunities like this with people like you who are willing to share, honestly, we're just not going to make it, make any progress. And so I thank you. And boy, I want to just take a minute to speak to Dr. McKoy's example about his kids, not wanting them to prosper at the expense of others. I remember the day that I found out that I was where I was at the expense of others. I was the one that had my foot on somebody else's neck, so to speak. And that was a earth-rocking experience for me. And I hope that others on this call are digging deeply and seeing what is at stake here. There are people that are suffering at our expense, and it's just not right. So it's conversations like this that we need to continue. It's the report from the Racial Equity Task Force that helps inform us. We really need to go deeper. My only disappointment about today was I really wanted to have a list of things to do when we walked out of here, so to speak. Anybody that knows me and has talked to me about reparations, you know, it was like when I walked out of my racial equity training, and it was like, well, okay, what's next? And this is 6 years later, and we're still talking. And so, you know, people are learning, it's getting better, but I don't see racism being dismantled. And so what I'm trying to do is come up with those actions that we can do. And so I'm going to throw out a short list of ideas in our few remaining minutes. And that is things like speak up when you see something wrong. A personal example, I was watching my daughter online in her pre-kindergarten class, and there was one black kid and everybody else was white. all the white kids got all kinds of attention and, you know, offers to expand on their ideas, this little craft they had just done. And the black kid, it comes to her turn, and the teacher, you know, basically said, oh, isn't that nice, you know, and then went on to the next kid, you know, just subtle clues, signals to those white kids that they're already better. This is pre-K, this is wrong. And then, you know, it doesn't take much to see those kids, those black kids beginning to act out because they want attention as they get into other, you know, older classes and stuff. And then they start getting sent to the principal and this sort of thing. And then pretty soon you got your school resource officers targeting those kids and putting them in the school to jail pipeline and that sort of thing. It's just, it starts early, it's insidious, got to speak up. We just can't let that stuff happen. Teachers have to be trained, but it's more than training. We have to help them implement, you know, good practices. At any rate, getting to know people of color is the other thing that I want to highlight. I've been doing, my husband Bill and I have been working with a Black family for the past 3 years, trying to provide affordable housing and that sort of thing. And just watching her as a single mother, she's married to a man who's, you know, in jail. She's got 5 kids. Just watching the insults that she takes on a daily basis is just heartbreaking. She's trying to get respect. She's trying to work her way. She's trying to be an entrepreneur. And there's just so many things that just get her every day. So I want to thank all the people of color who are willing to come out and help us see, because it doesn't get personalized. It doesn't get real until we really see. So next time, next panel, we're going to do a little bit more about, you know, actions, but speaking up, as Dr. Hogan said, is at a minimum, but there's many more things we can do. And so come back and watch our future panels, and we'll get some of those actions better defined. We can't just let this persist. So that's it for me at 7 o'clock, straight up. Thank you.
Look out for more information about our next panel.
Yep, should be in April. We're planning on April on housing, on the housing section. So at any rate, thank you so much. For all of you who submitted questions, we're going to try to get them addressed for you in the future. So keep an eye out. Thank you.
Thank you.